What if the one person who could save your life is someone you look through every single day? What if the key to your entire future is hidden in the quietest voice in the room? We build walls around ourselves, castles of power and prestige, and we forget that sometimes, the greatest strength is found not in boardrooms and bank vaults, but in the heart of an underdog with a hidden gift. This is a story about a woman no one saw, and the man who couldn't afford to look away. Elara traced the rim of a water glass with a damp cloth, her movements a study in practiced invisibility. Here, at the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant where the price of a single steak could pay her rent for a month, invisibility was her uniform. She wore it more snugly than the starched black apron tied around her waist. Patrons saw a pair of hands delivering a plate, a fleeting shadow refilling their water, but they never saw her. They didn't see the exhaustion pulling at the corners of her eyes, a constant companion from her second job cleaning offices after the restaurant closed. They didn't see the worn photograph tucked into her locker, a smiling man with her eyes, his face now gaunt from an illness that devoured both his strength and her savings. And they certainly didn't see the universe of words that lived inside her, a silent, vibrant legacy from a mother she'd lost too soon. Her mother, a brilliant linguistics professor, had believed languages were not just tools for communication, but windows into the soul of a culture. She had filled Elara's childhood with the melodic cadence of Italian, the guttural precision of German, and the intricate, poetic whispers of dialects so obscure they were spoken by only a few thousand people in remote mountain villages. It was a gift Elara had cherished, and then buried, because in her world of stacked plates and mounting bills, fluency in a near-extinct Caucasian dialect was as useful as a degree in ancient poetry. Tonight the air in the Gilded Spoon was thick with the scent of money and ambition. It clung to the tailored suit of the man who had just been seated in her section. Julian Croft. She knew the name, everyone did. The ice king of the tech world. A billionaire who had built an empire, Croft Enterprises, from nothing but code and sheer, ruthless will. He was younger than she expected, with sharp, intelligent eyes the color of a winter storm. A palpable aura of isolation surrounded him, a force field of power that kept the world at a calculated distance. He was with another man, his lawyer, David Chin, whose expression was a permanent mask of cautious appraisal. Their conversation was a low murmur of high-stakes strategy, peppered with phrases like hostile takeover, board anxiety, and the name that seemed to hang heaviest in the air, Volkov. Elara approached the table, her presence as subtle as a change in air pressure. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I start you with something to drink?" Julian Croft didn't look up from the document he was scanning on his tablet. "Water." Still. His voice was clipped, precise, an instrument designed for efficiency, not connection. David Chin offered a tight, professional smile. "The same for me, thank you." As Elara poured their water, her movements smooth and economical, she caught another snippet. "If the Volkov deal falls through, Marcus will have my head," David was saying. "He thinks you're being too cautious." Julian finally looked up from his tablet, his gaze sweeping past Elara as if she were a piece of furniture. "Marcus Thorne thinks in spreadsheets. I think in survival. There's something about this deal that feels wrong. They're too eager." Just then, another group arrived, 6 large men who moved with a coordinated, predatory grace that was jarringly out of place amidst the restaurant's opulent decor. They were loud, their laughter a harsh bark that cut through the genteel hum of the dining room. The manager, ever solicitous of his high-paying clientele, rushed to seat them, placing them at a large circular table uncomfortably close to Julian Croft's. Elara felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't just their demeanor, it was their language. As they settled in, their boisterous talk filled the space around her. It wasn't Russian, as she might have guessed from the name Volkov. It was Chechen. Not just Chechen, but a specific, regional dialect her mother had delighted in, one known for its complex system of honorifics and coded idioms. A language meant to be understood only by the initiated. A ghost of her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Listen, my love. Every word has a shadow, a meaning behind the meaning." She pushed the memory away. They were just tourists, she told herself. Loud, obnoxious tourists. She took their drink orders, her face a polite, neutral mask, but her ears were wide open, translating automatically, a skill as ingrained as breathing. They spoke of the city, the food, the women, all in crude, dismissive terms. But underneath the banal chatter, she heard the shadows her mother had spoken of. They used a term for Julian's table, the prize, and referred to themselves not as travelers, but as the hunters. A cold knot of dread began to form in her stomach. This was more than a feeling. This was a translation. The dinner service continued, a surreal ballet of clinking forks and polite murmurs, while a storm gathered just a few feet away from the most powerful man in the room. Elara moved between tables, her mind a frantic switchboard, toggling between English pleasantries and the Chechen plot unfolding beside her. The men's conversation had shifted. The initial bluster had given way to low, urgent whispers. They were no longer talking about the city, they were finalizing a plan. The leader, a man with a jagged scar bisecting his eyebrow, spoke with chilling clarity. The signal will be the dropped fork. 2 of us create the diversion to the left. The rest of you secure the asset. No witnesses, no loose ends. We take the package and we are gone. The package. Elara's eyes darted to Julian's table. He had a slim, carbon fiber briefcase resting by his feet. It had to be that. They weren't here to rob him. This was a targeted, military-style operation unfolding in a room full of oblivious diners. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had to do something. She looked for the manager, catching his eye across the room. She made a subtle gesture, a slight jerk of her head towards the men's table. He gave her a sharp, annoyed shake of his head, his expression clear. Don't make trouble. They're spending a lot of money. He saw loud tourists, she heard assassins. No one would believe her. A waitress spinning a paranoid fantasy about foreign intrigue. They would laugh at her, or worse, fire her for disturbing the guests. She glanced at her reflection in the polished surface of a wine cooler. A nobody. An invisible girl. What could she possibly do? Then she thought of the photograph in her locker, of her father's tired, hopeful smile. She thought of the mountain of bills that was crushing them both. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Inaction was a death sentence. The leader of the group picked up his fork. He toyed with it, his eyes locking with his men, a silent, final confirmation. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizingly slow crawl. The clink of silverware became a deafening roar in Elara's ears. The murmur of conversation faded into a distant hum. She saw the fork begin its descent. In that suspended moment, a choice was made. Elara pivoted, a full tray of steaming coffee carafes in her hands. It was a desperate, insane gamble. She moved towards the men's table, her steps deliberate. With a cry of feigned surprise, she allowed her ankle to twist, sending the entire tray and its scalding contents flying. The hot coffee cascaded directly onto the leader and the man next to him. They roared in pain and shock, leaping from their seats. The planned diversion had been replaced by a real one, chaotic and unexpected. The dropped fork clattered to the floor, its signal lost in the pandemonium. In that precious, 2-second window of chaos she had created, Elara lunged towards Julian Croft's table. She didn't scream for help. She didn't yell, "Police." She leaned in close, her voice a low, urgent whisper, and spoke directly to Julian, not in English, but in the same Chechen dialect the attackers were using. "They are not here for your money. They are here for the drive in your briefcase. This is a diversion. The real threat is the data wipe protocol that will be triggered by their external signal." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Julian Croft's eyes, which had been wide with surprise at the commotion, narrowed with razor-sharp focus, locking onto hers. The cold detachment was gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. The attackers, momentarily forgetting their pain, froze. The sound of their own secret language coming from the mouth of a waitress was a grenade thrown into their plan. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And it had just happened. That moment of collective shock was all the opening Julian's security detail needed. 2 men who had looked like ordinary diners at the bar were suddenly on their feet, moving with lethal efficiency. The restaurant doors burst open and more security flooded in. The chaos was swift and controlled. The 6 men, disoriented and exposed, were subdued before they could even draw their weapons. The Gilded Spoon, a sanctuary of quiet wealth, had become a scene of contained violence, its patrons gasping in a mixture of fear and morbid excitement. Amidst the flashing lights of arriving police cars and the hushed, frantic whispers of the staff, Julian Croft stood unshaken. His attention was fixed on one person. He strode over to Alara, who was leaning against a wall, her body trembling with adrenaline. David Chin was at his side, his face pale. "How?" Julian's voice was low, cutting through the noise. It wasn't an accusation, it was a demand for an impossible truth. "How did you know what they were saying? How did you know about the data wipe?" Alara took a shaky breath, her gaze meeting his. For the first time, she felt seen. "My mother, she was a linguist," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She taught me. I understood." Julian stared at her, his mind, accustomed to processing millions of data points a second, working to recalibrate his entire understanding of the situation. This woman, this waitress he hadn't even bothered to look at, had not only understood a rare dialect but had also parsed the technical and strategic intent behind their words. She hadn't just saved his life, she had saved his company. The package wasn't just a drive, it was the key to his entire encrypted infrastructure. Losing it was bad, but the data wipe would have been catastrophic, an extinction-level event for Croft Enterprises. He saw the worn fabric of her uniform, the faint tremor in her hands, and the clear, unwavering intelligence in her eyes. In that moment, the Ice King saw something more valuable than any corporate asset. He saw a key he never knew he was missing. The next afternoon, a sleek black town car, the kind that usually purred outside the entrance of the Gilded Spoon, was parked on the cracked pavement of Alara's rundown apartment building. A man in a suit delivered a thick envelope. Alara expected a check, a generous reward for her actions. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, there was no check. Instead, there was a one-page document. It was a contract. An offer of employment as a private linguistic consultant to the CEO of Croft Enterprises. The salary listed at the bottom made her gasp. It wasn't just enough to pay her father's medical bills. It was enough to give him the best care in the world. It was a lifeline, a fantasy, a terrifying leap into a world she could barely imagine. She looked from the contract to the eviction notice taped to her door. The choice wasn't a choice at all. It was an answer. Stepping into the lobby of Croft Tower was like entering another dimension. The air was cool and smelled faintly of steel and success. People moved with a sleek, purposeful stride, their faces illuminated by the glow of smartphones. Alara, dressed in the simple but elegant gray suit that had been delivered with her contract, felt like a ghost haunting a world she didn't belong to. Her first meeting was with David Chin and a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the head of acquisitions, a man whose silver hair and expensive suit radiated an aura of old money and earned arrogance. His handshake was limp, his smile a dismissive curl of the lip. "So, you're the heroine of the hour," Marcus said, his tone dripping with condescension as they sat in a sterile conference room with a panoramic view of the city. "Julian has always had a flair for the dramatic. A waitress. Our new secret weapon." David shot him a warning look. "Marcus, Alara's unique skills have already proven invaluable." "Skills?" Marcus scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "She got lucky. She overheard some thugs in a language she happens to know. Let's not mistake a coincidence for a core competency." Alara felt a flush of anger but held her tongue. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She met his gaze directly, her expression calm. "It wasn't luck that I understood the technical jargon they used, Mr. Thorne. Or that I knew their talk of a diversion was multi-layered. Luck is random. Knowledge is not." Her quiet, precise response seemed to momentarily surprise him. Before he could retort, The door opened and Julian Croft entered. The room's atmosphere shifted instantly, the tension sharpening into focused attention. He didn't acknowledge Marcus or David. His eyes went straight to Alara. "Are you ready?" he asked, and the question felt like it was about more than just the job. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. He led her to his office, a vast, minimalist space that felt more like an art gallery than a workplace. He handed her a tablet loaded with files, emails, transcripts of calls, preliminary contracts, all related to the Volkov deal. The men in the restaurant were hired by a shell corporation with ties to Volkov, he explained, his voice all